Some say the greatest stories begin with humble origins. For Obi-Wan Kenobi, that beginning came on the distant planet of Stewjon. Born in the year 57 BBY, he was just an infant when the Jedi Order discovered him, sensing something special in this child barely 6 months old. Little did anyone know that this baby would grow up to become one of the most legendary Jedi in galactic history. Picture the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, its towering spires reaching toward the stars. Within these ancient halls, young Obi-Wan found his first home as part of the Kibuk clan. Under the watchful eyes of Grandmaster Yoda and the skilled warrior Kindralig, he took his first steps into a larger world. By age 3, he was already learning to touch the Force, that mysterious energy field that binds the galaxy together. But young Obi-Wan wasn't your typical obedient Jedi student. The teachers quickly learned that this kid had a rebellious streak. While other younglings followed the rules to the letter, Obi-Wan questioned everything, pushed boundaries, and sometimes flat out broke the rules. It wasn't that he meant any harm. He simply couldn't help but follow his instincts, even when they led him down unauthorized corridors or into restricted areas of the temple. This rebellious nature became quite the problem when it came time to choose a master. Many Jedi Knights and Masters looked at young Kenobi's record and politely declined to take him as their Padawan. But Master Yoda, who had been teaching Jedi for over 800 years, saw something different in the boy. Where others saw a troublemaker, Yoda saw potential. That's why he specifically chose Qui-Gon Jinn to become Obi-Wan's master. Qui-Gon wasn't exactly the Council's model Jedi either. He followed his own path, often butting heads with the Jedi Council. But that's exactly why Yoda picked him. Who better to guide a rebellious spirit than someone who understood the struggle between following rules and following instincts? At age 13, Obi-Wan officially became Qui-Gon's Padawan learner. Their early relationship wasn't exactly smooth sailing. Qui-Gon's unorthodox teaching methods often left young Obi-Wan confused and frustrated. But as time went on, something clicked. When Obi-Wan built his first lightsaber, he even modeled it after his master's design, a sign of the deep respect that had grown between them. Together, they embarked on missions across the galaxy. They protected the royal palace on Alderaan, navigated the treacherous landscapes of Ryloth, and even spent a memorable life day on Kashyyyk, home of the Wookiees. During one particularly intense mission on that same forest world, they found themselves hunting, or rather being hunted by, Trandoshan hunters. Each mission taught Obi-Wan something new, not just about being a Jedi, but about life itself. Along the way, Obi-Wan formed friendships that would last a lifetime. His fellow younglings Geren and Pri shared his early adventures in the temple. A young Mon Calamari named Bant Irin became one of his closest confidants, and in the lower levels of Coruscant, he struck up an unlikely friendship with a basilisk named Dexter Jetster, whose knowledge of the galaxy's hidden corners would prove invaluable in years to come. When Obi-Wan finally earned the right to undertake solo missions, his first assignment took him to Lenara. He also made several visits to a mysterious fortress on Lamu and ventured into the sophisticated world of Gatalenta. Each mission built his confidence, honed his skills, and shaped him into the Jedi he was destined to become. But perhaps the most important lesson young Obi-Wan learned during these formative years wasn't about lightsaber techniques or Force abilities. It was about balance. Balance between rules and instinct, between duty and compassion, between the strict ways of the Jedi Code and the living Force that Qui-Gon so often spoke about. This understanding would serve him well in the challenges that lay ahead, as the galaxy stood on the brink of changes that no one, not even Master Yoda, could foresee. The year was 32 BBY, and the galaxy was changing. On the surface, it seemed like just another trade dispute. The powerful Trade Federation had surrounded the peaceful planet of Naboo with warships, choking off supply lines in what they claimed was a legal protest. But something darker lurked beneath the surface. Supreme Chancellor Valorum, watching the crisis unfold from his office on Coruscant, decided to send in negotiators, not politicians or diplomats, but Jedi. He chose Master Qui-Gon Jinn and his Padawan, Obi-Wan Kenobi, for what should have been a straightforward diplomatic mission. Nobody could have predicted how this decision would reshape the galaxy. When Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon arrived on the Trade Federation command ship, the welcome they received wasn't exactly diplomatic. The moment they sat down for talks, their conference room filled with deadly dioxis gas. This wasn't a negotiation. It was an assassination attempt. Fighting their way through ventilation shafts, the two Jedi stumbled upon something that changed everything: an invasion army. The Trade Federation had assembled thousands of battle droids, ready to launch a full-scale attack on Naboo. This was no longer about trade routes. This was an act of war. Racing to warn Naboo's people, the Jedi made their way to the planet's surface. There, in the swamps of Naboo, fate introduced them to an unlikely guide, a Gungan named Jar Jar Binks. Through him, they discovered an entire civilization living in magnificent underwater cities. But they couldn't marvel at this discovery for long. The capital city of Theed was under attack, and the planet's young queen needed their help. Queen Amidala was no ordinary ruler. Despite her youth, she showed remarkable courage in the face of crisis. The Jedi helped her escape the Trade Federation's clutches, but their victory was short-lived. Damage to their ship forced them to seek refuge on Tatooine, a desert planet far from Republic space. None of them realized then that this seemingly random detour would set in motion events that would echo through generations. When they finally returned to Naboo, they came with a plan. While the Gungan army drew the Trade Federation's forces into open battle, our Jedi heroes joined Queen Amidala in a daring mission to retake the capital. But in the power generator complex beneath Theed Palace, they faced something straight out of ancient nightmare: a Sith Lord. For 1,000 years, the Sith had existed only in history books and cautionary tales told to Jedi younglings. Yet here stood Darth Maul, real and lethal, his double-bladed red lightsaber illuminating the shadows. This wasn't just a fight for Naboo anymore. This was a battle between light and dark, good and evil, Jedi and Sith. The duel that followed pushed both Jedi to their absolute limits. But in a moment that would haunt Obi-Wan's dreams for decades, Darth Maul struck down Qui-Gon Jinn. Obi-Wan watched in horror, separated by an energy shield, as his master fell. When he finally faced Maul himself, everything he had ever learned was put to the test. In those desperate moments, Obi-Wan Kenobi did something no Jedi had done in a millennium. He defeated a Sith Lord in combat. Using his fallen master's lightsaber, he struck the final blow that sent Maul plummeting into the depths of the generator complex. But victory brought little joy. As Qui-Gon lay dying, he made one last request of his Padawan: train young Anakin Skywalker, a boy they had discovered on Tatooine. The victory celebration in Theed was bittersweet. Yes, Naboo was free, Yes, Obi-Wan had been promoted to Jedi Knight, an honor made even more significant by his defeat of a Sith. But as he watched his master's funeral pyre burn against the night sky, Obi-Wan felt the weight of his new responsibilities settling onto his shoulders. The Jedi Council initially resisted his request to train Anakin. They thought the boy was too old, too emotional, too attached to his past. But Obi-Wan stood firm. He had made a promise to his dying master, and he intended to keep it. He would train Anakin Skywalker, ready or not. Looking back, the Naboo crisis marked the end of an era. The reappearance of the Sith shattered 1,000 years of relative peace. The galaxy was entering a new age, one filled with shadows and uncertainties. And Obi-Wan Kenobi, newly knighted and suddenly responsible for training someone who might be the chosen one, stood at the center of it all. Becoming a Jedi Master isn't something that happens overnight. It takes years of training, wisdom gained through experience, and a deep understanding of both the Force and human nature. But sometimes fate has other plans. When Obi-Wan Kenobi took Anakin Skywalker as his Padawan, he was barely out of training himself. The ink on his Jedi Knight certification hadn't even dried, so to speak, and here he was, responsible for teaching someone who might be the most powerful Force user the galaxy had ever seen. Those first few months were a crash course in parenting as much as teaching. Anakin, fresh from life as a slave on Tatooine, struggled with fears of abandonment. During that first year, he would often sleep on the floor near Kenobi's bed, seeking security in his new master's presence. For Obi-Wan, it was a stark reminder that he wasn't just training a Padawan. He was helping a child adjust to a completely new life. Their early training sessions focused heavily on lightsaber combat, but teaching Anakin wasn't like teaching any other Padawan. The boy had raw talent in spades, but he'd missed out on all the early training most Jedi received as younglings. The Jedi Council hadn't been keen on Anakin's training from the start. These concerns cast a shadow over the early years of his apprenticeship, but Obi-Wan remained steadfast, determined to honor his promise to Qui-Gon and prove that his faith in Anakin wasn't misplaced. One of their first major milestones came with a journey to the crystal caves of Ilum. There, Anakin would construct his first lightsaber, a rite of passage for any Jedi apprentice. The blue kyber crystal he found resonated with his connection to the Force, and under Obi-Wan's guidance, he crafted a weapon that would serve him through countless adventures. Well, at least until it got destroyed on Geonosis. But that's a story for another time. Their missions together started small, but grew increasingly complex. They studied an impossible orbit around a dead dwarf star, pushing the boundaries of their understanding of both space and the Force. They joined forces with Jedi Master Shaak Ti for a challenging assignment on Naran Shiv. And yes, there was that memorable incident with the Gundarks, where Anakin had to save his master's skin. Obi-Wan would never hear the end of that one. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Their teaching styles often clashed like lightsabers in a duel. Where Obi-Wan emphasized patience and careful consideration, Anakin preferred action and instinct. The strict requirements of the Jedi Code frequently bumped up against Anakin's emotional nature and his attachments to his past life. These tensions would surface during missions, like their defense of a medical station over Felucia or their crashed shuttle adventure on Carnelian IV. They rescued Master Plo Koon on the waterworld of Glee Anselm, investigated a bombing at the Jedi Temple that shook their sense of security, and maintained a protection detail on Cato Nemoidia that would later become the stuff of legend. Through each mission, their relationship evolved, shifting from the traditional master and apprentice dynamic into something more complex. What started as a formal teacher-student relationship gradually transformed into a brotherhood. Their fighting styles began to complement each other perfectly, like two parts of the same whole. Obi-Wan's defensive mastery paired with Anakin's aggressive approach created a formidable team. They developed a kind of shorthand in battle, communicating with just a glance or a gesture. Their famous banter became legendary among the clone troops they would later command. As time went on, their joint leadership style became more fluid and natural. They could anticipate each other's moves, finish each other's sentences, and drive each other absolutely crazy in the way only brothers can. Anakin once told Obi-Wan, "You're the closest thing I have to a father," a statement that captured both the depth of their bond and the complexity of their relationship. Looking back, these years of training and partnership laid the groundwork for everything that would follow. The Council's early concerns about Anakin's emotional attachments never fully went away. The tensions between his natural impulses and the Jedi Code remained a constant undercurrent. But through it all, Obi-Wan and Anakin forged a connection that went beyond the typical bounds of Jedi training. Their story reminds us that sometimes the best teachers are the ones who are still learning themselves. Obi-Wan may not have been ready to take on an apprentice when he made that promise to Qui-Gon, but his dedication to Anakin's training, his patience in the face of challenges, and his willingness to adapt his teaching style all speak to the great Jedi Master he would become. The bond they formed during these years would be tested by the trials ahead as the galaxy spiraled toward a conflict that would change everything. War has a way of changing people. When the Clone Wars erupted on Geonosis, it transformed the Guardians of Peace and Justice into generals. The Jedi, who had spent centuries as peacekeepers, suddenly found themselves leading armies. And Obi-Wan Kenobi, whose greatest weapon had always been his mind, became one of the Republic's most valuable military assets. The promotion to High Jedi General came with massive responsibilities. Obi-Wan took command of the 7th Sky Corps, working alongside Clone Marshal Commander Cody, who would become one of his most trusted officers. Together, they led the Open Circle Fleet, bringing Republic justice to battlefields across the galaxy. But even in war, Obi-Wan remained true to his nature. While other generals might have focused purely on military victories, he earned his nickname the Negotiator by always seeking peaceful solutions first. He brought Jedi principles to military strategy, often finding ways to minimize casualties on both sides. This approach sometimes frustrated more aggressive commanders, but it saved countless lives. The war tested him in ways no one could have predicted. On Christophsis, he and his forces held the line against overwhelming odds, buying time for civilian evacuations. The liberation of Ryloth showed his tactical brilliance, turning a seemingly impossible situation into a victory. And his repeated clashes with the fearsome General Grievous became the stuff of legend among clone troopers. But perhaps the most challenging battles weren't fought on the front lines. They were fought in war rooms and council chambers, where Obi-Wan helped plan operations that would determine the fate of entire systems. He worked closely with clone commanders, developing tactics that played to the unique strengths of both Jedi and clone troopers. His strategies often emphasized flexibility and adaptation, traits that served him well in the chaos of war. Yet, amid all this conflict, the past had a way of catching up with him. Years before the Clone Wars, Obi-Wan had spent a year on Mandalore protecting Duchess Satine from insurgents and bounty hunters. They lived as fugitives, never staying in one place too long, always watching their backs. During that time, Satine gave him a nickname that would resurface years later, Ben. One particular incident on Draboon stuck in his memory. They were attacked by venom mites, and in the chaos of escape, Satine was injured. Not seriously, as she would later tease him about his overprotective reaction, but enough to leave an impression. That mission ended with Mandalore stabilized, but it also left both Obi-Wan and Satine with feelings they couldn't act on, bound by their respective duties. When they reunited during the Clone Wars, those old feelings resurfaced amid new dangers. Death Watch, a terrorist group of Mandalorian warriors, threatened Satine's peaceful leadership. Obi-Wan investigated their activities, supporting Satine's stance of neutrality in the wider war. But things got complicated when they discovered Governor Pre Vizsla's betrayal. The ensuing lightsaber duel between Obi-Wan and Vizsla, who wielded the ancient darksaber, was just the beginning of Mandalore's troubles. The situation spiraled further when Death Watch attacked a peace conference and framed Satine for murder. As the Republic Senate became involved, Obi-Wan uncovered a deeper separatist conspiracy. But the true horror came when his old enemy, Darth Maul, orchestrated a takeover of Mandalore. When Satine managed to get a transmission to him begging for help, Obi-Wan didn't hesitate. Despite lacking official sanction, he took the Twilight and launched a rescue mission. But Maul had set a trap. In the Mandalorian throne room, Obi-Wan was forced to watch helplessly as Maul killed Satine with a darksaber. If not for Satine's sister, Bo-Katan, Obi-Wan might have met the same fate. Through all these personal trials, the larger war raged on. Obi-Wan led the rescue of Master Even Piell from the Citadel, a prison thought to be inescapable. He helped defend Mon Cala from separatist invasion and played crucial roles in the campaign on Umbara and the Battle of Anaxes. Each victory came at a cost, and each loss hardened his resolve. The final assault on Utapau would prove to be one of his last major engagements of the Clone Wars. By then, Obi-Wan Kenobi had become more than just a general. He was a symbol of hope for the Republic, a master strategist who could turn the tide of battle not just with a lightsaber, but with wisdom and restraint. The war changed many things, but it never changed his core belief that the best victory is the one that comes without fighting. Looking back, the Clone Wars marked a turning point not just for Obi-Wan, but for the entire galaxy. The conflict would test loyalties, break hearts, and ultimately reshape everything the Jedi had sworn to protect. And through it all, Obi-Wan Kenobi carried the weight of command with the same quiet dignity that had marked his entire life, even as the cost of war hit closer and closer to home. While the Clone Wars raged across the galaxy, a deeper conflict lurked in the shadows. Obi-Wan Kenobi found himself facing not just armies of droids, but the very embodiment of the dark side itself. His first taste of this darker war came on Geonosis, in a dimly lit hangar, where he crossed lightsabers with Count Dooku. That first duel with Dooku was a harsh lesson in humility. The former Jedi Master's mastery of the elegant Makashi lightsaber form cut through Obi-Wan's defenses like they weren't even there. The defeat left more than physical scars. It opened Obi-Wan's eyes to just how dangerous their new enemy really was. During his capture and interrogation, Dooku tried something unexpected. He attempted to recruit Obi-Wan, revealing fragments of a larger conspiracy. But Kenobi wasn't swayed. Even as Dooku dangled the truth about a Sith Lord controlling the Republic Senate, Obi-Wan's loyalty never wavered. That steadfast dedication to his principles would become his shield against the dark side's temptations. The war brought new enemies, none more persistent than General Grievous. Their first meeting set the tone for what would become an epic rivalry. 7 times they dueled across the stars, from the intense Battle of Hippori to their final confrontation on Utapau. Grievous was unlike anything the Jedi had faced before. Part warrior, part machine, collecting lightsabers from fallen Jedi as trophies. But where Grievous had raw power and intimidation, Obi-Wan had patience and precision. The patience would serve him well in his encounters with Asajj Ventress. Their first clash on Christophsis showed them to be evenly matched. Space battles followed, with their ships dancing through asteroid fields and debris as gracefully as their lightsaber duels. But war has a way of creating strange alliances. As the conflict progressed, Ventress and Kenobi found themselves working together against common enemies. When Maul and Savage Opress threatened the galaxy, it was Ventress who came to Obi-Wan's aid, proving that sometimes the line between enemy and ally isn't as clear as it might seem. But while these battles raged in the open, Obi-Wan was piecing together a much darker puzzle. It started with the discovery of the clone army on Kamino. Something about the whole situation felt wrong. The Jedi had never ordered this army, yet here it was, ready and waiting just when they needed it. The supposed explanation that Master Sifo-Dyas had commissioned it only raised more questions than answers. As Obi-Wan dug deeper, he began tracking the elusive Darth Sidious, a phantom puppet master pulling strings from the shadows. The investigation led him through a maze of conspiracies and half-truths. When a clone trooper named Fives tried to warn him about hidden programming in the clones, protocols that could turn them against the Jedi, Obi-Wan started looking at Chancellor Palpatine with new eyes. The pieces were all there. The timing of the clone army's discovery, the convenient emergency powers granted to the Chancellor, the way the war seemed to benefit Palpatine more than anyone else. But seeing the whole picture proved maddeningly difficult. It was like trying to catch smoke with your bare hands. The dark side clouded everything, making it impossible to see the truth until it was too late. Through all these confrontations, Obi-Wan never lost his center. Where Dooku fell to promises of power, where Grievous gave in to hatred, where Ventress walked the line between light and dark, Kenobi remained steady. His strength wasn't in raw power or military might, but in his unwavering commitment to the light side of the Force. The final confrontation with Grievous on Utapau should have felt like a victory. After years of cat and mouse across the galaxy, Obi-Wan finally defeated the cyborg general. But something felt off. The dark side's presence had grown stronger, not weaker. All those battles, all those investigations, all those hints and clues were leading to something bigger, something terrible. Looking back, these encounters with the dark side were more than just battles. They were pieces of a puzzle that would only become clear in the war's final days. Each duel with Dooku, each clash with Grievous, each collaboration with Ventress added another layer to a truth that would shake the galaxy to its core. The Sith hadn't just returned. They had never really left. and they had spent centuries planning their revenge. As Obi-Wan sent his final report to Coruscant about Grievous's defeat, he couldn't have known that the real confrontation with the dark side was yet to come. The shadow he had been chasing, the conspiracy he had been unraveling, was about to reveal itself in a way that would transform not just the Republic, but the very nature of his relationship with the person he trusted most in the galaxy. Victory can change to tragedy in the blink of an eye. One moment, Obi-Wan Kenobi stood triumphant on Utapau, having finally defeated General Grievous. The next, his own troops turned their weapons against him. Commander Cody, who had fought beside him through countless battles, gave the order without hesitation. Execute Order 66. The blast from the ATTE Walker sent Obi-Wan and his Varactyl mount plummeting into the depths of a water-filled cavern. By pure luck or the will of the Force, he survived the fall. As the clone troopers above assumed him dead, Obi-Wan made his escape in Grievous's own starfighter, his mind racing with questions no one could answer. He wasn't the only survivor. Bail Organa, the senator from Alderaan, aided Master Yoda's escape from Coruscant after his failed duel with Darth Sidious. When they reunited aboard the Tantive III, the scale of the disaster began to emerge. The clone troopers hadn't just turned on Obi-Wan, they had turned on all the Jedi everywhere at exactly the same time. But the worst was yet to come. When Obi-Wan returned to the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, he found only silence and death. The security recordings told a story so horrible he could barely believe his eyes. There was Anakin, his brother in all but blood, leading clone troopers through the temple halls, not fighting them, leading them. The younglings, the children who had looked up to Anakin as a hero, hadn't stood a chance. Obi-Wan's hands shook as he recorded a warning message to any surviving Jedi. "Stay away," he told them. "The temple is a trap now." But even as he sent that message, part of him still couldn't accept what he was seeing. This couldn't be Anakin, not the boy he had trained, not the man he had fought beside. There had to be some explanation. When Padme prepared to leave for Mustafar to confront Anakin, Obi-Wan made a choice that would haunt him forever. He stowed away on her ship. He had to see for himself, had to know the truth. But what he witnessed on that volcanic world shattered any lingering hope. The man who stood before them wasn't Anakin anymore. When Padme begged him to come home, to turn away from this dark path, he responded with anger. As Obi-Wan watched in horror, Anakin used the Force to choke Padme, the woman he had claimed to love above all else. In that moment, Obi-Wan finally accepted what he had been refusing to see. His apprentice was gone, replaced by something else. Someone else. Darth Vader. The duel that followed would be told and retold across the galaxy for generations. They fought through the mining facility, their lightsabers cutting through metal and stone. The fight carried them out over rivers of lava, leaping from floating platform to floating platform as the very planet seemed to tear itself apart around them. Their words cut deeper than any blade. "You were my brother, Anakin. I loved you." The raw anguish in Obi-Wan's voice echoed across the burning landscape. But Vader was beyond reaching. From his position on higher ground, Obi-Wan begged Anakin not to try it. But consumed by rage and hatred, Vader leaped anyway. In one swift, terrible moment, it was over. Obi-Wan's blade severed Vader's remaining natural limbs, leaving him to burn on the shores of a lava river. The screams would echo in Obi-Wan's nightmares for years to come. He couldn't bring himself to deliver a killing blow. Instead, he took Anakin's lightsaber and walked away, leaving his former apprentice to a fate that seemed worse than death. Racing against time, Obi-Wan transported the unconscious Padme to Polis Massa. There, in a medical facility far from the chaos consuming the galaxy, she gave birth to twins, Luke and Leia. With her last breaths, Padme insisted there was still good in Anakin. Then she was gone, leaving Obi-Wan with an impossible burden. The decision to separate the twins wasn't made lightly. Bail Organa would adopt Leia, giving her a home on Alderaan. Luke would go to his aunt and uncle on Tatooine. And Obi-Wan? He would watch over the boy from afar, becoming his silent guardian. It wasn't the future any of them had imagined, but it was the only way to protect the children from their father's dark legacy. As Obi-Wan prepared for his exile on Tatooine, he carried more than just Anakin's lightsaber. He carried the weight of what felt like 1,000 failures. He had failed the Jedi Order, failed the Republic, failed Qui-Gon's faith in him. But most of all, he had failed Anakin. The bright-eyed boy from Tatooine had become a monster, and Obi-Wan couldn't help but wonder if he could have prevented it somehow. The galaxy was entering its darkest hour. The Republic had fallen, replaced by an empire built on fear and hatred. The Jedi were all but extinct. And somewhere, in a suit of black armor, Darth Vader drew breath, a twisted shadow of the hero he had once been. For Obi-Wan Kenobi, the Clone Wars had ended not with a victory parade, but with a long walk into the desert, carrying the last hope for the galaxy's future. Sometimes, the most important battles are fought in silence. After the fall of the Republic, Obi-Wan Kenobi disappeared into the harsh deserts of Tatooine. The great general, the famous negotiator, the Jedi Master became simply Ben, a hermit living in the dangerous Jundland wastes. But this wasn't retirement. It was a mission more important than any he had undertaken during the Clone Wars. The name Ben wasn't new to him. He had first used it years ago on Nar Shaddaa, and Satine had called him that during their time together on Mandalore. Now it became his identity, a way to distance himself from the famous Jedi Master the Empire was hunting. He chose his dwelling carefully, a simple home in the wastes that gave him a clear view of the Lars homestead in the distance. But Obi-Wan wasn't completely alone. In the quiet of the desert nights, he learned to communicate with the spirit of his old master, Qui-Gon Jinn. Through these conversations, he began studying the ancient techniques of the Whills, deepening his connection to the Force in ways the Jedi Temple had never taught. He also developed skills that would help him survive in the desert, including a perfect imitation of a krayt dragon's call that would prove useful more than once. Life as a hermit didn't mean complete isolation. When a great drought hit the region, Obi-Wan quietly helped defend local moisture farmers from those who would steal their precious water. He confronted Jabba the Hutt's thugs when they pushed their protection rackets too far. When Tusken raiders looted the Lars family's moisture vaporators, he intervened, carefully building relationships with both the farmers and the Sand People. He even got involved in the affairs of a trading outpost called Danar's Claim, where he worked with a Tusken leader named Aryak. These carefully chosen interventions helped build his reputation among the locals. He became known as a mysterious but benevolent figure, someone who might help if you were in real trouble, but who preferred to be left alone. Young Luke Skywalker was never far from his thoughts. From his hidden vantage points, Obi-Wan watched the boy grow. He saw Luke learning to pilot a T-16 Skyhopper, showing the same natural skill his father had possessed. Sometimes, when technical problems grounded the Skyhopper, parts would mysteriously appear in the night, though no one could say where they came from. But this watchful protection caused tension with Owen Lars. Luke's uncle had only agreed to take the boy in on one condition: Obi-Wan had to keep his distance. Owen feared that any connection to the Jedi would put Luke in danger, or worse, lead him down the same path as his father. Their disagreements about how best to protect Luke created a rift that would never fully heal. The quiet of exile was sometimes broken by echoes of his past. When word reached him that a former Jedi named Ferrus Olin had been captured by the Inquisitorius, Obi-Wan briefly left Tatooine to mount a rescue. It was a calculated risk, but one he felt compelled to take. Not all Jedi had been as fortunate in their hiding places as he had been. His most dangerous confrontation came when Maul, the former Sith who had killed Qui-Gon, tracked him to Tatooine. The arrival of young Ezra Bridger complicated matters, but also showed Obi-Wan that a new generation of Force users was rising to fight the Empire. When Maul finally found him in the desert, their final duel was nothing like their previous encounters. This time, Obi-Wan took the same stance Qui-Gon had used in their first battle on Naboo. Maul, consumed by decades of hatred, attacked just as he had back then. But Obi-Wan was ready. In 3 precise moves, it was over. As Maul lay dying, they spoke not as enemies, but as 2 men who had been shaped by the same tragic events. Their final conversation turned to the Chosen One, and despite everything that had happened, Obi-Wan still held on to hope for the future. In a final act of respect, Obi-Wan built a funeral pyre for his old enemy. As the flames rose into the desert night, he reflected on how much had changed. The brash young Padawan who had first fought Maul was gone, replaced by a man who understood that victory and defeat weren't always what they seemed. His days fell into a pattern. He would watch the Lars homestead, making sure no Imperial investigations came too close. He maintained his image as a simple hermit, while secretly keeping the skills that had made him one of the greatest Jedi Masters sharp and ready. He became a student of the desert itself, learning its rhythms and dangers. The locals told stories about Old Ben. Some said he was a war veteran. Others claimed he was a wandering mystic. A few even whispered that he might be a surviving Jedi, but no one knew for sure, and Ben never corrected them. His true identity, like so much else, remained buried beneath the desert sands. These years of exile weren't just about hiding or protecting Luke. They were about patience, about keeping faith when all seemed lost. The galaxy had entered its darkest time, but Obi-Wan Kenobi held on to something precious. Hope. Hope that one day, the boy he watched growing up on a moisture farm would help bring balance to the Force. Hope that light would return to the galaxy. Hope that his long vigil would not be in vain. After almost 2 decades of watching and waiting, a simple message changed everything. "Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope." These words, spoken by Princess Leia Organa, set in motion events that would finally bring Obi-Wan out of the shadows and back into the fight against the Empire. The chain of events began far above Tatooine, where a rebel ship carrying Princess Leia was intercepted by an Imperial Star Destroyer. In a desperate move, Leia hid the stolen plans for the Empire's ultimate weapon, the Death Star, inside an astromech droid named R2-D2. Along with a protocol droid called C-3PO, R2 escaped to the planet below, carrying information that could save the galaxy. Fate has a funny way of connecting the dots. These two droids, wandering the endless deserts of Tatooine, were picked up by none other than the Jawas, who sold them to Owen Lars, Luke Skywalker's uncle, the same farm Obi-Wan had been watching for all these years. It was as if the Force itself had guided these crucial plans right to where they needed to be. When Luke discovered a fragment of Leia's message while cleaning R2-D2, his curiosity was piqued. But it was the droid's escape into the desert that truly set things in motion. As Luke pursued R2 into the dangerous Jundland wastes, he found himself ambushed by Tusken raiders. Just when things looked bleakest, a chilling howl echoed through the canyons, scaring off the attackers. It wasn't a crate dragon at all, but Obi-Wan Kenobi, using a trick he had perfected over years in the desert. For the first time, Luke met the mysterious hermit he had heard so much about. Back at Obi-Wan's home, the full message from Princess Leia played. She begged Obi-Wan to deliver the plans to her father on Alderaan, reminding him of his service during the Clone Wars. It was then that Obi-Wan did something he had been waiting nearly 2 decades to do. He opened an old chest and pulled out a lightsaber, the weapon of a Jedi Knight. "Your father wanted you to have this when you were old enough," he told Luke. For the first time, Luke heard about his father, not as a navigator on a spice freighter, but as a Jedi Knight who fought in the Clone Wars. Obi-Wan didn't tell Luke everything, not yet. He explained that Darth Vader, his former pupil, had betrayed and murdered Luke's father. It was true from a certain point of view. The good man who had been Anakin Skywalker was gone, consumed by Darth Vader. Obi-Wan also introduced Luke to the concept of the Force, describing it as an energy field created by all living things that surrounds us, penetrates us, and binds the galaxy together. He invited Luke to join him on his mission to Alderaan, to learn the ways of the Force and become a Jedi like his father. But Luke hesitated, torn between his desire for adventure and his responsibilities at home. It wasn't until he returned to find the Lars homestead in flames, his aunt and uncle killed by Imperial stormtroopers hunting for the droids, that Luke's path became clear. With nothing left to hold him on Tatooine, he agreed to go with Obi-Wan, taking the first step into a larger world. Their journey took them to Mos Eisley Spaceport, a wretched hive of scum and villainy, as Obi-Wan put it. When Imperial stormtroopers stopped them at a checkpoint, Luke witnessed firsthand the power of the Force. With a simple wave of his hand and the words, "These aren't the droids you're looking for," Obi-Wan clouded the minds of the troopers, allowing them to pass unhindered. In the cantina, Obi-Wan demonstrated another kind of power. When a belligerent patron named Dr. Evazan and his partner Ponda Baba threatened Luke, Obi-Wan intervened. In seconds, his lightsaber flashed, and the confrontation was over. It was a glimpse of the warrior who had once been called the negotiator, though his preferred negotiation tactics had clearly changed over the years. They needed a ship, and fast. Obi-Wan's choice fell on a smuggler named Han Solo and his co-pilot, Chewbacca. Despite Han's skepticism about the Force and his somewhat dubious reputation, they struck a deal. 2,000 credits now, with 15,000 more upon arrival at Alderaan. It was a steep price, but time was running out. As they lifted off in the Millennium Falcon, narrowly escaping Imperial pursuit, Obi-Wan might have allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. After so many years, he was back in the fight. But the galaxy had changed. When they arrived at the coordinates for Alderaan, they found only debris. The entire planet had been destroyed by the Death Star, a demonstration of the Empire's terrifying new weapon. Before they could process this horror, the Falcon was caught in a tractor beam and pulled into the massive space station. Inside the Death Star, Obi-Wan took on the most dangerous part of their impromptu rescue mission. While Luke, Han, and Chewbacca went to free Princess Leia from her cell, Obi-Wan set out alone to disable the tractor beam. Moving through the corridors like a ghost, he relied on skills honed over a lifetime of Jedi training. The years in the desert hadn't dulled his abilities. If anything, they had refined them. With precision and focus, he deactivated the power control for the tractor beam, clearing the way for their escape. But before he could rejoin the others, Obi-Wan sensed a presence he hadn't felt in a long time. Darth Vader, once his apprentice, now his greatest failure, stood before him. Lightsabers ignited, master and former student circled each other. Their duel was unlike their fiery confrontation on Mustafar. This was a more measured exchange, each combatant testing the other, probing for weaknesses. As they fought, Obi-Wan caught sight of Luke and the others making their way back to the Falcon. In that moment, he made his final decision. Raising his lightsaber in front of him, Obi-Wan closed his eyes. Vader struck, but something impossible happened. Obi-Wan's body vanished, leaving only his empty robes and lightsaber to fall to the floor. He had become one with the Force in a way no Jedi before him had managed in the moment of death. But this wasn't the end of Obi-Wan Kenobi. As Luke fled toward the Millennium Falcon, he heard a familiar voice. The last adventure of Obi-Wan Kenobi had ended, but his influence on the galaxy was far from over. Death is rarely the end of the story for those who have made a lasting impact on the galaxy. For Obi-Wan Kenobi, it was more like turning a page. In the moment when Vader's lightsaber should have struck him down, Obi-Wan vanished, becoming more powerful than his former apprentice could possibly imagine. Those years of communing with Qui-Gon Jinn's spirit had taught him a skill no Jedi in recorded history had mastered: the ability to retain his consciousness after death, to become one with the Force while still maintaining his identity. The first sign that Obi-Wan's influence would continue came during the desperate attack on the Death Star. As Luke flew his X-Wing down the trench, trying to hit an impossibly small target with proton torpedoes, he heard a familiar voice. "Use the Force, Luke." In that critical moment, with the fate of the rebellion hanging in the balance, Luke trusted his mentor's guidance. He switched off his targeting computer, reached out with his feelings, and destroyed the Death Star. It was the first lesson Obi-Wan taught from beyond. Trust the Force over technology. Luke wouldn't see Obi-Wan again until the icy wastes of Hoth. As he hung upside down in a Wampa's cave, nearly frozen to death, Obi-Wan's spectral form appeared, directing him to Dagobah, where he would find Yoda, the Jedi Master who had trained Obi-Wan himself. This guidance wasn't random. Obi-Wan knew that Luke needed more training than he had been able to provide, and Yoda was the last great teacher of the old Jedi ways. On Dagobah, Obi-Wan continued to serve as a bridge between the old generation and the new. When Luke impulsively decided to leave his training to save his friends in Cloud City, both Yoda and Obi-Wan warned against it. "If you choose to face Vader, you will do it alone," Obi-Wan told him. "I cannot interfere." It wasn't that he didn't want to help. The nature of his new existence came with limitations. The most difficult moment came after Luke's devastating duel with Vader. Learning that Vader was his father shook Luke to his core. When he confronted Obi-Wan about why he had been told Vader murdered his father, Obi-Wan gave his famous certain point of view explanation. The good man who was Anakin Skywalker had been destroyed when he became Darth Vader. It wasn't the whole truth, perhaps, but it reflected Obi-Wan's genuine belief about what had happened to his former apprentice. In that same conversation, Obi-Wan revealed another secret he had kept. Leia was Luke's twin sister. The twins had been separated at birth to protect them from the Emperor, each hidden where Vader wouldn't think to look. This revelation completed the circle of truth about Luke's family, though it came later than it perhaps should have. After Yoda's death on Dagobah, Obi-Wan appeared to Luke again. "I cannot interfere with your confrontation with Vader," he explained. "You must face him on your own." But even as he set boundaries on what he could do, Obi-Wan was preparing Luke for his most important challenge. The fate of the galaxy would depend not on Luke's skills with a lightsaber, but on his faith that there was still good in his father. During the Battle of Endor, as the rebellion fought to destroy the second Death Star, Luke faced both Vader and the Emperor. In his most desperate hour, Luke didn't have Obi-Wan's visible guidance, but the lessons Obi-Wan had taught him about compassion, about believing in redemption, about trusting the Force, were all there. When Luke threw away his lightsaber rather than kill his father, he wasn't just rejecting the Emperor's temptation. He was embracing Obi-Wan's final and most important teaching. Violence is not the answer. Compassion is. When Anakin Skywalker returned to the light, sacrificing himself to save his son and destroy the Emperor, he fulfilled the prophecy of the Chosen One in a way neither he nor Obi-Wan could have foreseen. Balance came to the Force not through the destruction of the Sith, but through an act of redemptive love. After his death, Anakin's spirit joined those of Obi-Wan and Yoda, appearing to Luke during the celebration on Endor. The master and apprentice, separated by darkness for so long, were finally reunited in the light. But Obi-Wan's influence didn't end with the fall of the Empire. Over the years, he continued to appear to Luke, offering guidance as Luke struggled to rebuild the Jedi Order. Their conversations shaped Luke's Jedi philosophy, which differed in important ways from the rigid code of the Old Order. Obi-Wan had seen firsthand how the blindness and detachment of the old Jedi had contributed to their downfall. His experiences gave Luke permission to chart a different course. There are even accounts of Obi-Wan appearing to Leia, though not as frequently as to Luke. These manifestations helped her understand her own connection to the Force and the legacy she shared with her brother. Often, Obi-Wan would appear alongside Yoda, the two old masters working together to guide the new generation, just as they had during the Clone Wars. Obi-Wan's final lesson to Luke emphasized something he had learned during his years of exile on Tatooine: the importance of caring for individual people while not getting caught up in grand galactic schemes. The old Jedi Order had become too focused on the big picture, losing sight of the individuals they were supposed to protect. Obi-Wan's time watching over Luke had taught him the value of a single life, a lesson he passed on to his last student. In many ways, Obi-Wan Kenobi's story defies our usual understanding of life and death. His influence continued long after his physical form vanished on the Death Star. Through his guidance of Luke Skywalker, through the lessons he imparted, through the example he set, Obi-Wan helped shape the future of the galaxy. The boy from Stewjon, the Padawan who became a master, the general who became a hermit, found a way to continue serving the light even beyond death itself. If we look at the full span of his life, what emerges is a portrait of a man who never stopped learning, never stopped trying to do better. He faced failure and loss that would have broken many others. He watched his master die, his apprentice fall to darkness, his order destroyed, and his republic transformed into tyranny. Yet through it all, he maintained his faith in the light side of the Force and in the potential for good in the galaxy. In the end, that might be Obi-Wan Kenobi's most important legacy, the simple, powerful truth that hope can survive even in the darkest times. That no matter how complete the victory of evil might seem, the light side of the Force will always find a way to shine through. That a single life, lived with purpose and compassion, can change the course of history itself.